Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and with the patch 11.05 we saw a pretty big shakeup towards the overall meta, with a ton of classes as well as class specs that normally don't get a lot of time in the spotlight rising towards the top. Some of those classes were rising thanks to some of the new talent changes, which create opportunities for new builds that allow the class to shine in new ways than ever before, while other classes were rising due to some unfixed exploits, and Outlaw Rogue, my favorite spec, was one of them. But with the exploits fixed and all of the rule breakers seeing some Toldagor jail time, you'd think that everybody would peel away from Outlaw Rogue back to the good old assassination, but it looks like Outlaw Rogue has actually found some new high-end footing in the current meta, and the spec is actually quite a competitive option and quite a popular option, especially with some of the players picking the spec up for the very first time in 11.05, as it's gotten easier for newer players to get into, but also some of its rules and complexities have been made a lot easier to work with some of the recent talent adjustments. So for today's video, I want to do my up-to-date guide for the patch 11.05. I will have the original guide that goes into some of the more details regarding how to pick up and play Outlaw Rogue as a new player in War Within expansion, but this guide will primarily cover everything that is new and everything that is adjusted for that original guide, which again, I'll have all those links in the description of this video. As always, if you want to see more guides for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe, but otherwise, let's dive right in. So first things first, I want to go over what is new for Outlaw Rogue specifically, and off the bat, you can see that I'm playing on a KiR Rogue. That is one of the newer options that is available, and when you play KiR as a rogue, you come with a couple of perks like being able to glide, which isn't necessarily faster than normal movement speed. It's definitely not faster than sprint, but it can give you some way to maneuver around with a bunch of enemy knockbacks and spacing abilities, and being able to catch yourself mid-air with a quick glide is actually incredibly fun. Plus the wing buffet ability that can knock enemies back, which is great for clearing some of the affixes, but also being able to interrupt enemies, which is interesting as a rogue. It is not something we've been able to do before, and having an AoE knockback like similar to a shaman or a balance druid is actually very fun to play into. Besides this, a handful of other abilities no longer really need to be pressed, like Slice and Dice becomes basically passive thanks to Cut to the Chase, where Dispatch will now grant you 3 seconds of Slice and Dice per comm point spent, which means when you have the button of Slice and Dice, you can just take it off of your bars. I have Slice and Dice in a fantastic spot, but I don't really know what to replace it with right now, so I'm just keeping it there until I figure out a better ability to place it with. I'm just so used to Morozki bindings as they are, I just don't really know what to replace Slice and Dice with. But if you are someone who struggled to find key binds and have enough space in your bars for all the rogue abilities, Slice and Dice can just be removed off your bars. You don't have to think about it or put it up ever again. Another button that's gotten a lot better is Feint, which can now be used off GCD. So as you're mid-combat with an enemy, for example, as long as you're, let's say I'm building comm points, and you can see how all my abilities are going on global cooldown, but Feint isn't, which means I can actually use Feint as I use abilities like Ascendant Strike or as I use abilities like Dispatch at the same time. This ability to use Feint simultaneously during your combat mid-abilities is very nice when it comes to overall defenses as a rogue, especially when you're playing Mythic Plus builds where you're playing around the talent of elusiveness. Feint gives you even better single target or solo personal defenses, 20% DR on top of that 40% AoE DR. So this allows you to survive damage over time effects or any abilities that focus you down directly that are not specifically an AoE ability, making you incredibly tanky. And for Outlaw Rogue, since you have so much energy regen, you should always have the energy available in order to be able to press Feint in between of your combat abilities. Outside of this, we do have a bunch of new talent changes within the class tree and the spec tree. In the class tree, Outlaw Rogues gain a second charge to Grappling Hook, which is pretty cool. It's a button that we enjoy using. It has cooldown reduction aspects to it, so it actually has a shorter cooldown than normally, what is it, 45 seconds, if not 30 seconds at this point. But having 2 charges on Grapple Hook just gives us even more mobility. This synergizes incredibly well with Fatebound when we play Death Survival, which allows us to Grapple Hook and then use the second grapple hook for free again. So we basically can do 4 grapple hooks in a row, which allows you to cover such a wide distance. It is crazy. Using out in the open world or in a raid or a dungeon, you really just get to move all over the place, but you no longer have Shadow Step. So this is where Shadow Step used to be for Outlaw Rogues. So we're trading out 2 charges of grapple hook for Shadow Step. This doesn't have that much significant value within PvE content specifically. Talent of Subterfuge now affects other talents that require stealth, and for our assassination spec, we covered that I think a week ago at this point. For them, it's a little bit more interesting because Subterfuge affects a lot of talents. For Outlaw, it only affects the talent of Taken by Surprise, which as of right now, we don't really get to utilize as much, so it's kind of like a moot point really, but it is an effect that may potentially play a part in future builds. And the last thing that's different is we no longer have Echo and Reprimand. That has now been replaced with Supercharger, where whenever you use Roll the Bones, it supercharges to combo points. So where Echo and Reprimand had to have us land on a specific empowered combo point in order for it to function like a stronger type of finisher, this is a much easier in actual application. With Supercharger, we roll the bones and you can see two of my combo points now have this like border around them. That means they're supercharged. And when I build combo points, you can see those combo points are glowing blue. That means whenever I use a finisher, it will, instead of treating it like it uses 7 combo points, it'll actually add 2 extra combo points to that finisher, making the finisher stronger. This affects a couple of different things. One, it makes the finisher like Dispatch a little bit stronger. Between the Eyes also a little bit stronger. It could also prolong the buff uptime of Between the Eyes to 30 seconds, where normally it can be upped by maximum 21 seconds. That Supercharger will actually affect the duration of the Between the Eyes crit buff, but also it plays into our cooldown reduction mechanic, where Outlaw Rogue is a big CDR spec. As we spend combo points into finishers, Restless Blades allows to reduce cooldown of many of our abilities like Adrenaline Rush, Between the Eyes, Blade Flurry, Blade Rush, Ghost of Strike, Grapple and Hook, Keep It Rolling, Killing Spree, Roll the Bone, Sprint, Vanish, basically all our offensive ability, utility, mobility, all of those things are tied to cooldown reduction. And when we get those supercharged combo points, that also plays into the combo point cooldown reduction. Those additional combo points from being supercharged also count towards this cooldown reduction. So like, let's say I roll the bones, it's in a 45-second cooldown, I spend those combo points into a dispatch, I spend combo points again, and I spend combo points again, and in just 3 finishers, my roll the bones is back up off of cooldown. That is how good this is. This is a very powerful tool that can only be empowered further with new talents like Echo and Reprimand, where after consuming a supercharged combo point, next Cinder Strike does an extra attack that deals additional physical damage. Not that strong right now. What is stronger though is Force Induction. Increases the bonus granted when damaging finisher moves consumes a supercharged combo point by 1, which makes this mechanic even better than before. What this does is it changes the way we use Roll the Bones a little bit. It does make it more complicated, and that is one thing that a lot of players hate about Outlaw Rogue is the complicated playstyles of Roll the Bones and how you have to manage all these buffs and know when to roll and when to re-roll. That can definitely be a bit of a pain. However, we do bypass this to make this as easy as possible. There are some new rules technically behind how you use Roll the Bones, but we don't actually have to think about those rules or apply them, because we do have a Weakauras that monitors Roll the Bones and monitors those rules and lets us know when is a good time for us to roll the bones, simplifying a huge portion of that complexity that comes with Outlaw Rogue. Now, in the class spec itself, we do have some changes like Precise Cuts technically get buffed up. It now buffs up your Blade Flurry by 4% per actively missing target rather than by 2%. Technically, this makes it a better talent, but we just don't have enough talent points to really invest into it to pick it up for AoE content. Otherwise, we need to drop things like Ghost of Strike, but it's just way too good on single target. So you don't really get a choice to play Precise Cuts. There isn't a lot of abilities you can like shift out of talent-wise to pick something like this up, although it's technically is a really good talent. Crackshot has also changed quite a bit. When entering stealth or whenever you use Vanish, it now refreshes the cooldown of Between the Eyes. This means you can no longer mess up Between the Eyes and how that works. So as you build combo points, you use Between the Eyes. There was a bug where rogues basically could clip the Between the Eyes in such a weird way where you use Between the Eyes and you vanish, or if you vanish a little too early before Subterfuge is up, basically Between the Eyes would go on cooldown, and we kind of wanted to have this ability off cooldown. A lot of those bugs got fixed. A lot of those issues are not an issue anymore because now you can use Between the Eyes freely. And whenever you do vanish, it just resets the cooldown. So almost think of it like a reload, right? You use Between the Eyes, you use that one shot of it's available for you, and then the next time you need to use another shot of Between the Eyes, you just vanish to reload it. So now we just kind of use Between the Eyes until we can no longer use it, and then we say vanishes until after the Between the Eyes is on CD. This allows us to have a much more aggressive playstyle where we don't necessarily have to hold between the eyes, we don't have to hold our vanishes, we don't really need to be considering our cooldowns that heavily, and it just allows us to play super aggressively, press the abilities as soon as they're available, and use them as actively as humanly possible, which is really nice to play with. Besides this, the actual ability, the capstone of Keep It Rolling also got buffed up. They reduced it from a 7 minutes down to a 6-minute CD, which is still long, but plays around our cooldown reduction mechanic of Outlaw, and does actually make Keep It Rolling better as a build playstyle. So this is a buff either way. It's not one that's going to be noticeable. This button is always weird for a lot of players just because it's such a long cooldown, but just trust me, based on numbers, this is a very good change either way. Another thing that's different for the spec of Outlaw is our hero specs, which technically have been changed. Fatebound does see a number of good changes, like Deliver Doom now has AoE scaling. Previously, Deliver Doom would buff the damage of your coin flips, particularly the tail flip, which deals immediate damage, and that damage would be buffed up when there's nobody around you and completely turned off as soon as there's a nearby target near you. But now it buffs the damage by 30% but scales down for every nearby target. So it now has scaling to it, which makes it much better in AoE content. Fatebound Edge Case talent has also been changed, where activating a Drone Rush, not using a finisher after activating a Drone Rush, causes you to flip a coin immediately. So this changes our finisher, or rather opener, a little bit. Technically, you can still do the original opener, just a Drone Rush into Slice and Dice and Roll the Bones before combat. Just make sure you're not targeting any enemies, because now that when you're targeting somebody and press a Drone Rush, you flip both coins and you can get on tails, which can deal instant damage breaking out of stealth. Or instead, do what I've been doing and just let the tank get the opener, let the tank get into combat, and as soon as they do, then you'll immediately a Drone Rush while targeting an enemy, benefiting from Edge Case into immediate Roll the Bones, and then you immediately follow up into your damage rotation. Either way you do it is perfectly fine. Outlaw Rogue never really been a strong opener type of a class or had a strong opener requirements about it, so either way you open up on a target, it really doesn't make that much of a difference in terms of your overall damage output. The only other hero spec that got a couple updates is Trickster. Technically, they were able to finally get KiR's additional comm points to function with other Outlaw Rogue abilities, so like everything that buffs the damage, but also the comm point cooldown reduction, similar to how the playstyle of Supercharger works. So we're able to get that whole Supercharger effect, how it affects all aspects of Rogue, not just damage, to work with Trickster. That being said, Trickster is still not very good. Like, no matter, they will really need to give this thing a big overhaul or really buff the damage of Killing Spree or change how Killing Spree works in order to make Trickster viable, but as it stands right now, it's just not a preferred option or a numerically significant option, at least at this moment, for the spec of Outlaw Rogue. And next up, I want to go over some of the different talents that you should be playing as an Outlaw in 1105. Now, previously, Outlaw Rogues had two powerful builds that you could pick from, and they were very close to each other in terms of performance. Previously, it was a playstyle either all about Keep It Rolling with Roll the Bones, that mostly plays into Sinister Strikes and pistol shots, or you will play the Ambush build with the talent of Hidden Opportunity. Now, previously, those two builds were a lot closer. Now, however, with 1105, Keep It Rolling has now significant advantage over Hidden Opportunity builds. So for the patch 1105, I will mostly focus on covering Keep It Rolling because it is better, especially when it comes to high-end content. That being said, if you are interested in ambush builds or hidden opportunity builds, which are a little bit easier to some degree, those I will still have available in our original War Within Outlaw guide, but also I'll have them linked in the written guide for Outlaw Rogue in our Discord channel. So if you want those builds, you'll find those references within links down in the description of this video, and definitely check out the original guide if you want to get more basics on Outlaw Rogue. But here I'll primarily focus on Keep It Rolling because it's just more significant when it comes to current Season 1 of War Within. So the single target build for Outlaw Rogue for Keep It Rolling, and I'll have these again in our description, but also in the written guide in our Discord channel. So if you want to check out those builds so you can draw those talents immediately, you could literally import them directly. I'll have import codes as well, like I said, description and in the written guide, which you can port directly into the game by pasting them into the section here, calling the build whatever you want to, and you can import this build directly onto your rogue right now. But this build is primarily going to utilize the new Supercharger talent and is going to take points out of lethality to go all the way with Supercharger into Force Induction. Though compared to the original build that we had during the launch of War Within, this build doesn't really change too much and really keeps a lot of the core abilities that it had previously. Now the AoE version of Keep It Rolling is a little different, but not that much different compared to what we initially had during the launch of War Within. We're picking up things like combat stamina, since we can't really reach all the way into heavy hitter, since we need points into deft maneuvers, which allows Blade Flurry to now generate combo points in AoE. This is still very powerful and continues to be a very strong choice, and we pair it together with Dance Steel to make the Blade Flurry AoE windows even better. We only spent 2 points to increase our AoE output, but a lot of the rest of the talent builds, you can see, is very single target focus, which allows us to have excellent boss damage while amping up our AoE cleave damage in the process. When it comes to the class talent tree, we don't do much, but we are running elusiveness, since evasion can be used fairly regularly, since we have cooldown reduction that feeds into evasion, so we can use evasion really often thanks to the talent of Float Like a Butterfly. So that's an extra way to give us defenses, plus together with Feint, which is now off GCD, can make us an absolute tank. We don't take a lot of damage as a rogue or as a melee compared to most melee in the game. We are just super sturdy. As long as you remember to press the button for Feint and evasion, you are going to be an absolute monster and barely taking a damage, which makes Outlaw Rogue super consistent in Mythic Plus dungeons. Next, I want to go over how to gear your rogue in the patch 11.05. For the most part, and I'll have this link down below in the description, this is also available in our guide that we covered initially, which I'll have linked down below, so definitely check out if you want to get the basics of Outlaw Rogue, because that really covers a lot of those, as well as in a written guide. But you should really start using sims and raid bots to really optimize your character, especially if you're just trying to get the most accurate information regarding which choices and which pieces of gear would be the biggest of benefits for your rogue. However, I do want to help some of you guys get started. Like if you're coming back for patch 11.05 and want to figure out what stats to look out for your Outlaw Rogue, or which items you should be looking out to gear out your character, then at the very least I wanted to help you guys get at least started with some of the very basics. For the most part, when it comes to gearing your rogue, agility is still going to be the king stat. So in most cases, if an item gives you more agility than another item, in most cases it is going to lead to an upgrade. So item level is going to be very important. Afterwards, your secondary stats are going to matter. With your haste, which you want to maintain roughly between 18% and 90% specifically, no lower, no higher. This is necessary to make a lot of the core aspects of the Keep It Rolling version of Outlaw Rogue work. Afterwards, your best secondary stat is going to be versatility, which simply amplifies all damage done, but also helps reduce damage taken, which can be nice in Mythic Plus content. From that point on, critical strike is a very decent stat, with your least desirable stat being a mastery. Outside of this, however, I want to give you a couple of good items to look out for when it comes to gearing out your rogue. The first thing you should note is the Blackrock Depths as a raid is out right now, and it is another raid that players can dive into. The raid itself actually has a couple of decent items that you can get from. None of these right now on Sims are the best in slot items, as a lot of those best in slot items will come from current Season 1 War Within content, like the Neurobar raid, for example, or even Dells, for instance. But a lot of the items in Blackrock Depths are actually quite powerful, especially with a lot of them having additional effects and additional damage components on them. So all of these items are actually not that bad for a starter character. However, like I said, your best slot items are going to come from current Season 1 War Within content. Neurobar Palace in particular, specifically Nexus Princess Kaiveza. Nexus Princess has a handful of items that are incredibly good for Outlaw, like the Void Reaper's Contract Trinket, a very solid trinket that actually has a set bonus combo, which is really nice bonus to get if possible, because Kaiveza also has a really good weapon called Void Reaper's Warblade. The weapon itself isn't amazing, like the actual poison damage it does isn't the greatest, but the combo that it has with the trinket is worth the while, and it's a very solid weapon. And if you can get this thing in at least heroic fully upgraded, that's going to be best in slot offhand weapon if you can replace with a higher item level main head weapon for the rest of the season. This thing is really solid, and even getting this in champion track with normal is an incredibly big upgrade for Outlaw Rogue. Besides this, Queen Ansarek also has a very strong trinket called Mad Queen's Mandate, a very powerful item that actually scales with our versatility. The damage of the trinket will actually scale with one of your best stats, so it actually gains even more value, and it provides a critical strike. It's just raw good damage all on its own, and it's a very powerful item that you should look out for. However, another item that you should also look out for is from Delve content, which is called Scholar Momentum. This actually may be the strongest item in the game by far for Outlaw Rogue specifically. where your helpful attacks and abilities have a high chance to build momentum, granting you bonus movement speed. At 5 stacks, when your trinket reaches maximum momentum, it grants you 20% additional movement speed for 10 seconds. And while at full momentum, your attacks will hit the target at high velocity, dealing additional nature damage, scaling with your current movement speed. So the more movement speed you have, the more damage this trinket does. This is especially important for Outlaw rogues because we can combine the ability of Sprint in order to increase the effectiveness of that trinket, increasing our movement speed by 100% for 12 seconds. And however, normally you would want to save Sprint until, wait, don't I need this for mobility? Outlaw rogues have 2 grappling hooks, so you could always save Sprint for that trinket, but also with Restless Blades, which helps reduce the cooldown of many of our abilities, Sprint is one of those abilities that gets reduced by Restless Blades, which means this Delve trinket has scaling value with Outlaw Rogue specifically, mostly because we have so much freedom in how we can use Sprint. And in some cases, if you have really good buffs and combat point management as Outlaw, you can have Sprint basically up 24/7 if you wanted to. Because of that specifically, this is actually a very powerful trinket. So if you have this on champion track, this is better than most heroic trinkets in the game. And if you have this on hero track, this is better than a huge portion of mythic trinkets in the game. So if you have this from Delves, this is literally one of the best trinkets that you'll get for Outlaw, but you will then need to start tracking the actual buffs with this trinket, and I'll have a handy Weakauras down below, available in description, but also in written guide if you want to get access to the Scroll of Momentum Weakauras. Finally, we also have crafted gear, and when it comes to embellishments in particular, embellishments used to be very powerful during the expansions like Dragonflight, but in Warward they're not nearly as powerful, but it's still worth crafting if you get your hands on a couple of sparks as well as some gold in order to be able to craft a few items, because they still do help out in a long cause of things. Now, the embellishments you're looking to craft is going to be elemental focusing lenses, and you want to get 2 of them. Ideally, you would get them on items like bracers, but also legs. Normally, the tier set legs for this tier are not that good for Outlaw in terms of raw stats, so we replace those legs with an embellished version of legs. But if you need to run legs to make up your tier, maybe you don't have a helm or really good shoulder set, you can also craft this in your boots or your belt, whichever items you have that are lower item level. But getting 2 items with elemental focusing lens as your embellishment choices is generally the go-to right now for Outlaw Rogue. Now, as for the actual playstyle of the Outlaw Rogue and the rotation, not a lot of things really have changed. So if you want to check out our original guide video for War with an Outlaw, it goes over into the in-depth parts of how to play Outlaw Rogue, management of roll the bones, management of buffs. But if you are familiar with our guide, not a lot has changed really. Instead, you actually just press less buttons as an Outlaw Rogue. Like, you don't use Slice and Dice or Echo and Ripper management, since that is now part of your roll the bones mechanic. The new Outlaw Rogue simply just gets better comp point generation thanks to the supercharger. You have better spending, better, faster cooldown reduction mechanic, also thanks to supercharger. So overall, it just feels faster as a class. Your cooldowns are coming back quicker. Your defensives and offensives and even utility buttons come back off quicker. And supercharger does technically add a whole new set of rules with Roll the Bones, but like I said before, we actually solve a lot of these with the Weakauras. It removes a lot of the cognitive load required to play Outlaw Rogue to keep up with all these rules around Roll the Bones. And with the Weakauras basically letting you know when it's safe or when you should reroll Roll the Bones in order to maximize the supercharger buff. It makes the spec incredibly easy to play, and with this Weakauras, even someone who is not really great at Rogue or found Outlaw Rogue overwhelming, this helps reduce a lot of that overwhelming factor by a decent bit. We still have a very similar playstyle in single target and AoE thanks to Blade Flurry, because we just play out single target rotation, but just turn on Blade Flurry when we're hitting more than one target, so it's incredibly easy to pull off in Mythic Plus. Feint being off DCD, Mythic Plus in particular, is amazing, both in Raids and Mythic Plus technically, but in M Plus in particular, it makes us super tanky. Throw that together with an evasion and just feel like a god. You just cannot get hit by anything whatsoever. Like, nothing's ever going to reduce your health super low. It makes us super healthy, and your healer is definitely going to be thankful whenever you press Feint, which now can be used without having to interrupt your basic combat rotation. I do, however, wish the Outlaw Rogue had a bit of a build variety, as you'll find out pretty quickly when picking up the spec in 1105. We're kind of stuck with one talent build type, mostly keep it rolling, and one hero spec choice of Fatebound. Would have loved to see some variation for Outlaw so there was some more builds in the future, but the changes we got so far in 1105 are better. They do make the spec much better, and a lot more players have picked that up since. So overall we saw quite a bit of an upgrade for the Outlaw Rogue. Now really quickly, I want to go over our consumables that we'll be utilizing in 1105, though those for the most part haven't changed compared to the original guide that we made at the start of the expansion. For your weapons, you'll want to enchant those with Authority of the Depths for single target as well as AoE. It's just a better enchant overall for us right now. Cloaks are going to be put up with Winged Grace, chests with Crystalline Radiance, braces with Armored Avoidance, legs with a Stormbound Armor Kit, boots with Defender's March, and rings generally with Versatility. As for the actual consumables that we'll be consuming within Dungeons and Raids, Flask and Temper Versatility, since that is our best secondary stat, we don't really need more haste because we'll be reaching those haste breakpoints naturally through gear, and I guess you could do it through enchants if you needed to, but ideally you should be doing it through gear. For Damage Potion, we'll be using Temper Potion of Damage, and for Algari, Healing Potion will be used for survivability. Ironclaw, Whetstone, and Weightstone are generally good if you're fully stat capped in order to maximize your damage. I've seen some rogues utilizing Algari mana oils on weapons in order to help hit certain haste breakpoints, so those are good too, but if you're not struggling with haste, then Whetstones or Weightstones are generally good. Augment Ruins, but only if you can afford them, since they do lose them as soon as you die, so those are probably better to save as an optional choice for really high-end content. Unless you feel like you're never ever gonna die, then technically you can benefit from Augment Ruins as well. For regular feast, raid food is going to be just fine, but any food that provides agility or versatility is also a fine alternative. Common Blasphemite Gem should be used in at least one slot on your gear, but the rest of your items should ideally be slotted either with Quick Sapphire for more versatility or Versatile Emerald for more haste if, again, you're trying to hit some of those haste breakpoints. And with everything being said, though, I do want to thank you guys so much for watching this updated guide for Outlaw Rogue for 1105. I do hope all of you enjoyed it and found it informative. If you did enjoy this video and found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community if you want to get access to the written version of this guide, which has all the information you need, from Weakauras to the rotation to some of the different build varieties and whatnot, and probably the best place to ask me questions directly when it comes to Outlaw Rogue. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.